Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be going through a webinar with Nathan and Sophia here on some of our new features that we have released and some of the exciting things on our roadmap as well. So let's get started. So you may have seen me already, or you might have at least heard my Discord announcements about this webinar. My name is Russell Sung, and I'm the Developer Relations Manager here at Inworld. I'm also an XR dev, so I love working on immersive and engaging experiences. And I'll leave it to Nathan to explain more about himself.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Nathan. I'm a director of product on the team. Been with Inworld for about a year and a half. Most of my experience has been in XR as well, actually. And so, yeah, really excited to chat with you and update on some of the exciting features we've been building internally.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophia Singh. I lead product management for AI/ML at Inworld. Beforehand, I was a quant researcher, so still doing machine learning, but for different applications as well. Super excited to be here to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, and so to touch on the questions part, we'll also be having a Q&A period at the end. But as we're going through some of the conversations or some of the features, if you got a question that you'd like us to talk about at that point, please feel free to drop it in the chat as well. So before we kick things off, there's just a little sizzle reel that we'd love to play for you here.
My name's Jesse. I'm Ragnar.
F-Rise.
TX5000.
I already have a partner. I didn't realize you ate you understood.
Yeah, it's probably one of my favorite sizzles that we have. Yeah, you can really imagine kind of the possibilities that are enabled by Inworld AI, and I'm really excited to share more about what we're working on. My backdrop here is kind of like an Easter egg for Baldur's Gate if anybody's working through that right now, and a lot of the characters that are in there I think would be an amazing use case and example. Like D&D is already such a great playground for people, so just imagine if the characters are ones that you can talk to in your own voice, right? So yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on the three pillars of what makes Inworld, and where some of our updates are fitting into. So again, performance, we want the latency to be as low as possible so that you're essentially having a conversation in real time, right? Like in current models that we're seeing, sometimes you can really tell that there's some processing happening on the other end. But with Inworld AI, we've really focused a lot of time and effort on reducing that latency to, essentially be seamless, right? Like you're speaking and then you're getting a reply right away. And so this really helps you get lower costs too, right? Because you're not spending so much time like crunching what's going on. You're actually just getting that stream going and having a conversation right away. And again, another personality pillar would be our character engine, right? So I think we're going to switch this to character brain, but right now it's character engine. And we're really focusing on personality at the center of our experiences. So we want our characters to really reflect the full, kind of experience of what it is like when you're talking to somebody, right? So there's like visual feedback, there's emotional information, there's animations that are coming through. Of course, there's, excellent voice. We've recently announced our 11 Labs integration, and I see a lot of projects integrating it already. So it's very exciting to see that. And, your voice and the character's voice is such an important part of that engagement. And, Sophia will talk later a bit about relationships that I think fits perfectly into this mesh as well. Talking about meshes, contextual meshes. So, as you know, characters have to stay within the boundaries of their world, right? Like if you're working on a fantasy game, you really don't want your characters to be answering stuff about, sci-fi concepts or spaceships in the future. And so it's really important to make sure that your characters have the context that they need to be successful, right? So giving them like a lore, like a backstory, and making sure that they stay within those bounds is super important. And that's where our fourth wall feature falls into. And of course, safety is such an important consideration too, right? Like we've been working with a lot of companies on educational projects, right? Targeting kids. And so for us at Inworld, safety is a huge thing. And we really want to emphasize that that is an area of focus for us. And so we want to make sure that your users are protected. And I like to say, like, we protect the users from themselves, but also that your characters are protected from your users. And so that is a really great way for, brands and for your experiences to stay on brand and on track. So let's, dive a little bit deeper into the character brain. Nathan, do you want to maybe give us a little bit more context here?
For sure. So I'll start with just a high-level overview. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Inworld's product offering from a high level, but first and foremost, the character brain is the core of what we're supporting. Deep personalities that feel different, they talk different depending on how you've created them in the studio, with the full range of human emotions, right? So a big inspiration for us is actually working one-to-one off of the human brain. So how do we communicate as humans? Obviously with the words that we say, but beyond that, the voice is a big component there. We're working on some exciting things that will allow more flexibility over the intonation of the voice, how that inflection and prosody will deliver a different message depending how you say something. Gestures, obviously nonverbal communication is a big aspect of that, to go one-on-one in full 3D type of experiences. If there's no facial expressions or body language, communication is very different as well. And lastly, actions as well. So empowering more of what the character can do and not just what they say as a big update to what we're building. And I'll go deeper into that in our Goals 2.0 update in the next slide. And lastly, maybe just one more point on that, Russell, of course, just highlighting that we are focusing on supporting this with no code setup. But one thing I did want to tease here is we're actively working on ways to enable this with code, as we've heard from a lot of users that they actually prefer that in some scenarios. So being able to create characters directly within your Unity or Unreal editors, etc., and make changes to the character configs via API is something that will be supported. Cool. So the meat of what I want to dive into today is an update on our goal system. And so I'll just kind of describe the overall vision for goals and talk about what we had for V1, where we're at with V2, what's moving forward. And so in general, goals and actions is a system where we're looking to find the middle, the sweet spot of control over a character's outcome and the generated procedural aspect of the character, right? So on one end, you could have fully curated, pre-scripted responses where you have full control over it. On the other hand, you could have the character just go off on their own and interact with users however they want to. But the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, right? Like developers still want to put some guardrails and when a character should say something, how they should deliver a specific message, almost as if you're like a movie director telling an actor, hey, I want you to say it in a positive tone. I want you to say this specific type of content, but still infuse your own actor creativity or our character personality, in our case, into that response. And so for goals V1, rather, it was like a very simple system where you could pass in an instruction to the character. So, you could pass in a line, something along the lines of, say something funny. And then whenever that was triggered, which was all manual for V1 as well, the character would say something funny based off of the current context of the conversation, based off the personality, etc. And so we had a lot of feedback that, number one, there's sometimes we actually want the character to be a bit more scripted in terms of what they deliver as a verbatim line, maybe a greeting message, etc. And we also want characters to be able to proactively take actions on their own without triggering that from the client side. And so some of the features we've added in V2, they address this, and we actually have even more that I'll share into. So the first one is contextual intents and training phrases. So this is an existing feature in some standard conversational AI tools, but now we're able to allow directly in the Inworld Studio and our tools to author different types of intents via training phrases. They'll index on and generalize based off of what's put in there. And the characters can proactively activate a goal when a player says something of that sort. And I'll talk about V3 and maybe I'll just sneak a peek now per topic. As V3, we're actually going to elaborate contextual intents, not just to be based off of what the player says, but the full context, right? So what the player is doing, what the environment is, what is the scenario? So for example, if the character detects that the conversation is getting awkward or tense, that could be the trigger for a goal condition, as opposed to just, hey, character or the player rather said something along the lines of XYZ. And I'll do a live demo to kind of help paint the picture a bit more clear as well, just to be cognizant of time here. So in the slide, yeah, maybe I'll just do the demo now, and I'll talk over some of the other points. And so intent recognition, this is kind of what it looks like right now. We have this new YAML editor, which allows just a little bit more flexibility for us to move fast in terms of not having to be bogged down with UI, etc. And yeah, I'll touch on that. There's some frustration with the syntax, but it is standard YAML syntax, and we're adding some tools there to make this a bit more understandable and usable. But for now, intents, you can give an intent name, add in some training phrases, as simple as that. If a player says anything along these lines, this intent will get recognized and can be used later down as an activation condition for a goal. So for example, here, quest request, if a player is asking anything about a quest, essentially, that can be hooked up to a goal where the action and output of the goal is to give one of two quests. In this scenario, we're leveraging our new random feature, which I'll touch on. Is generally you could do this on the client side, but we found that there might be enough support for this, a need for this, that we supported it natively in the YAML editor. So you could give different instructions or actions in general, different probability weights, and based off of random generator, we'll select which one to follow. And it could be multiple sets of actions as well. So that's the first part, is just this intent recognition. So you can see I have multiple. One is also for asking for a weapon. One's asking for a quest. You could have more. The second part of what we added in here was reintroducing kind of like the say verbatim feature, as oftentimes we found that developers, they want a character literally verbatim to say a line that's been written ahead of time with no improvisation. And so that's in now as an action. So instead of basically an instruction to the character, which what we had before, we can now write in say verbatim instead. So instruction, just to recap, is a way where you can give, for the lack of a better word, an instruction to a character to say something and prompt them to do a specific behavior. And then say verbatim is even a more forceful way to give a specific line. And lastly, in addition to this, we also introduced parameters, which is a very powerful feature, which for the first time allows developers to, at runtime, pass in information from the client, the game, the world state, wherever you're getting information to the character to use without having to, say, comprehensively list out a bunch of different goals and instructions at design time in the studio ahead of time, because you may not be able to predict it. So one simple example here is you could just pass in, hey, if you want maybe the character to update the player on how much HP they have left, if it's like a companion type of character, so we could trigger something like health update, pass in the value of the HP through the client, and then this will be given as an output to the character. So that's a lot of talking. I'll kind of just share like a demo here. So maybe I'll just demo the intent recognition first. So we can start off and just say hi. Okay. Quests for me, and I'm just typing just to avoid some of the echo cancellations. Okay, so you can see here, I basically asked for a quest as a debug tool where we know that the quest was executed, and the specific quest was the princess is captured by a dragon. And so as you can see back here, that was one of the two quests I gave, and 50% of the time, the other quest would have been delivered instead, which was to retrieve the candy recipes. And so now let's say, I'm interested in getting a health update, and I'll just demonstrate this feature. Is in the studio, you can manually test this. Obviously, it's not the most intuitive, but you can pass in the manual trigger here, and then you actually just need to pass in the value of the parameter through this section box here. So let's say we have maybe 52 HP left, right? And I can call this out here. And so you see like this value was updated based off of what I passed in. From an actual integration perspective, of course, you would be getting this directly from the client in real time from some internal resource value. And I'll just change that to kind of show you. Yeah. And this is a demonstration of how it works with say verbatim. So it's delivering exactly what I want it to there. But you could also use the parameters in an open-ended instruction as well. As a pro tip, you could in fact leave the entire instruction as a parameter. And this would essentially give you full control over what to do or what to prompt the character to say. I don't know why I type status instruction here. So you could pass an entire instruction at runtime. And this is essentially like a new API call that we will do some wrapping around in the future as well. So developers can at any time update the character's brain for what's happening. And I'll take one more minute to explain kind of V3 what's coming. Is right now we do have this emotion change. This existed in Goals V1 as well. So you can at any time override our emotion engine and prediction to hard code a value of what the character should currently be feeling. We're going to extend this to basically allow you to update any aspect of the character at runtime. So you can change the character's knowledge. You could change the character's dialogue style. Maybe they start out being very short, but as they become more friendly with and acquainted with a player, they become more verbose. You could change the character's motivation, and all of that will basically be done with syntax, something along the lines of like set emotion or set motivation. And so just keep an eye out for that. That's going to be coming in the next like 2 weeks here. And also you can change the relationship state with a player as well, which Sophia will talk about a bit down the line. Cool. So that's it for my side.
It was pretty great. I think it's, you know, I talk to developers a lot about how to best utilize goals, and sometimes having this deeper understanding can really take your experience to the next level. So I'm really looking forward to some more of these webinars that we'll do to help, you know, educate as we grow the user base, you know. So we just make sure that we're back in the right side here. So we talked about contextual mesh earlier. That QR code will take you to our recent blog post highlighting some of the different features that we're talking about. But right now, I would love to, you know, pass the baton here to Sophia to give us a little bit more information about some of these features here.
Awesome, sounds great. So contextual mesh is really about the characters not existing in a vacuum, but instead existing in an experience to have the context that they should have in the experience. So we have a set of features that really enable this, ranging from knowledge, player profiles, safety, coherence, relationships. I'll go through each one of them briefly, and a lot of information would be in that QR code that we just shared. We have some demo videos in there as well. So firstly, knowledge is something that I think many of you may have been using already. We allow creators to input knowledge both on a character level and also on a shared level for common knowledge shared between different characters. And what we do there is essentially from inputted knowledge, we determine when in the conversation is the knowledge relevant to the player query or the character's comment, and we'll make sure that that knowledge is incorporated. So very common uses of the knowledge include, say, for a murder mystery experience, what were the clues that should be known? Say for a simulation experience, what should be known about the world? A lot of use cases there as well. For player profiles, this is a feature that we added a couple months ago. It essentially is a way for the character to be aware of who the players are to further customize the conversation to the player. So what you see here on the right-hand side is a screenshot from the player profiles tab within Studio. And you can see that we have a few default labels already, but you can also add any of the ones that are applicable to your experience. So in this example, the player's world and the player's attitude are added, but you can really define whichever context variables you would like, and those would be accounted for when the character decides how to respond to the player. So for example, if the character is in a world where their specific role would dictate how a character and a player should act, then whatever is inputted in the role there would actually substantially change how a character is going to address the player. Awesome. So moving on to configurable safety, Russell, if we can move to the next slide. There we go. Configurable safety. So as Russell mentioned earlier, there are definitely experiences where safety safeguards is very, very important. There are also other experiences where certain topics of the safety should actually be allowed for the experience to be real. These can be, ranging from profanity, violence, adult topics, alcohol, politics, religion, and the list goes on. So we offer topic by topic configurations based on how strict, mild, or just non-control for this at a character level, so that some characters, maybe they are okay to talk about alcohol topics, other ones they're not. And this is something that we allow on the character level. That being said, we do safeguard by still universally disallowing hate speech and self-harm topics, just to make sure that those topics would never be mentioned by our characters, no matter what the configurations are set here. Awesome. If we can go to the next slide, please. Russell, coherence. Short-term and long-term memory is a feature that we just started offering in alpha release. If anyone here is interested, definitely give us a ping and happy to add you to the alpha release list. The goal here is that we want our characters to be able to have working memory, so that whenever, if it is a very long-term engagement, they actually remember what has been said before, what facts has been gathered before, and to further build a long-term relationship with the player. How we achieve this is we have short-term memory and long-term memory as two separate functions. So for short-term memory, the character, through the conversation, they would try to remember notable facts. So things like what the player's favorite cafe is, what the player's favorable weapon is. Those types of facts would be gathered in short-term memory. And then long-term memory is really around what themes did past conversations cover and what was mentioned. So if the player and the character went on a mission and they took down a base, that would be something that's remembered in long-term memory. When any conversation happens, from the information that we're gathering into long-term and short-term memory, the character can then draw upon past memories when relevant to the conversation. So this is a feature, again, it's in alpha release. It's not on all studio characters yet, but if you're interested, give us a ping. I'm happy to add you to the list. We can move on to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. So relationships is also a feature that we added a couple, 3 months ago. It essentially allows characters to build relationships with other players. And the relationships that we currently offer are listed there. There's some enemy, arch-enemy relationships. There's friends, close friends, and there are some romantic relationships as well. But behind the scenes, how this works is with every interaction, as you can see in the screenshot, and you probably have seen this in your studio chat as well. With every interaction, we try to measure how the specific interaction impacts the underlying relationship qualities. And these are very foundational qualities like trust, attraction, similarity, respect, flirtation. From there, we try to understand, okay, throughout the course of the conversation between character A and player B, overall, there has been 10 conversations where there is a decrease in trust, and there is 5 conversations where there's a decrease in respect, and then that guides us in determining what the relationships are, what the actual relationships are, whether it's an enemy or a friend. If it's on the opposite side, a lot of trust, a lot of respect, a lot of similarity, then likely the relationship is going to progress into being more of a friendship relationship. We also have a toggle within Studio that allows you to change up the relationship fluidity to determine how fast a character may be able to build a relationship with a player. That's it from my side. Happy to also go into some of the upcoming features, but maybe I'll pause here to see if we have any questions on what Nathan and I have presented.
Yeah, we have one from Daniel trying to clarify between, adult topics and, the strictly NSFW content. So are we still restricting NSFW stuff? And what does adult topics cover then?
Yeah, so there, you may remember there's 3 toggles. There's the no control, mod control, strict control. Even for no control, there are still some not safe topics, phrases, concepts that we still control for. Those are the ones that may be closer to hate speech, closer to concepts involving children, involving consent, those types of topics that we still believe are very harmful and we definitely want to control for. If you set it to strict control, then of course that cuts out most of the adult topics. If you set it to mild control, some we would have to go case by case, but the less graphic and less literal descriptions would be allowed. But of course, the very graphic ones would not. For that one, you would have to set it to no control.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I can touch briefly on some of these recent updates before we dig a little bit deeper on the future plans. So I'm sure, as you've seen, actually here, Tito has a question about relationships, professional relationships. So, do you mean in the sense of like an AI assistant, for example? I think those are some of the relationships that we definitely have some support around.
Yeah. So.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna add to it. Particularly what I mean by professional relationships, something like think about like a doctor-patient relationship, or in a more like professional setting where, like, let's say a psychologist to their patient, something like that. Is that in the works?
Yeah, so for a relationship like doctor-patient or psychologist-patient, that would be something that is going to be better set either in player profiles. You can list it as relationship with the character, or that should be set in the character's core setup. The dynamic relationship feature works well for relationships that could be changing depending on the conversation. So if you want your character to become a doctor through conversations with the player, then that would be a good place for dynamic relationships. But usually for something that's as role-based, I would recommend either setting it in core description or player profiles.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll touch briefly on what Arun is asking about in terms of collaboration. So again, Inworld as a platform, like we support our developers in the applications that they're building. We've had a lot of outreach, and I'm sure Tito is also on the same track here about how we can help, the medical field improve some of their training or maybe incorporate our characters in some of their modules. And so there's a lot of, activity and interest in this space. And so from the perspective of collaboration, Inworld is a platform, right? So we're here to help drive and support what you're building, if that makes sense. So let's take a look at some of the updates that we've recently released. With Origins, we've actually seen a really big uptick in interactions and engagement because a streamer has picked it up, and it's been very exciting to see the community react to the time and the effort and the work that we put into Origins. And we've also incorporated some 11 Labs voices for the humans in Origins. So that's very exciting. So a lot of those characters that you might have interacted with in the Steam Next Fest for early access, we've updated them to our 11 Labs integration. So the voices are really robust and really cool. We've also released a GTA 5 online mod by Block, who did the Skyrim mod with us previously. And that's also been really fun to see. You can kind of play through the entire storyline online and experience different characters and their different motivations. And it's really funny. One of the early characters you meet, she's somehow driven her SUV into like a swimming pool. And so as one of the, officers on the scene, you have the option to either like take a bribe and then not write her a ticket, or write her a ticket. And then throughout that whole experience, it's all with your voice. So you're able to, kind of understand a little bit more about the character's motivations and get more immersed than, just picking from a series of dialogue options. So these are some of the exciting feature project releases that we've had. But I'll leave Sophia to highlight a little bit more on our future plans.
Yeah, happy to. A few upcoming features. There's first going to be an update to the avatar chat experience with one of our internal IP characters, Inoquin. You may have seen it if you were with us at our GDC booth. It essentially is a more simple, abstract version for you to be able to visualize how your character may interact without there being an explicit look and face to it. Separately, we also have plans to launch multi-character interactions. So that's right now, Inworld technology can already be used at runtime to power some multi-character interactions if you have the characters talk to each other. but we're working on a more complex orchestration layer for characters to understand when they are in a multi-character scenario, who should be the one talking, who should be the one waiting for the other person to wrap up. And then we also have a live update of character motivations coming up. Right now, motivation is something that you can set within Studio for a character throughout all of their interactions. We'll have some rumination, some update of motivation that's internal to the character brain coming up there. And then we also have strict cognition control. So a lot of this is around cases of more commonly known as hallucinations that people may see. So we have more control around cognition, especially for characters where they have very specific facts and knowledge entered, to be able to make sure that any messages from the characters would really be tailored to the knowledge that's being entered. And we also have generated cues to animations. So this is about if your avatar, if your character has certain animations pre-built out, we want to be able to generate cues mid-dialogue for when certain animations should be rendered so that the animations and the dialogue can really line up against each other. And then lastly, we'll have more support for design-focused APIs. A lot more will come there, and there will be a lot more documentation as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Sophia. Yeah, design time APIs has been a big ask from developers, so I'm very excited to be able to share more as we get closer to that. And so, as we come towards our Q&A period, I just want to highlight that, Inworld is available on a wide variety of platforms, right? So we support both Unity and Unreal. We even have like a Roblox and a Minecraft SDK. And we've recently released our Simple API, which is essentially an easier way to get onboarded. It does not support audio streaming, right? But if you're just looking to build like a simple text interaction and you're just trying to get an understanding of how to get started, Simple API is a great way to go. And on that note, I also want to touch on our changes to pricing. So we are going to be switching away from the minute pricing model that we have now to a per interaction call. So that's going to be a lot more transparent, a lot easier for devs who are building purely text projects. Kind of calculating minute interaction time when it's just a text conversation can be quite challenging and hard to estimate. And it's actually a net benefit because you're going to be getting more time, like getting more interactions than you would have on the minute cap at the same price. So that's very exciting. So this is our Q&A period. So if you haven't asked us any questions, happy to take them now. Feel free to drop them in the chat. But, well, here we go. In my implementation of goals, I intended my utilization of goals to be triggered with the context applied in the goal invoke. Yes, P instructions. In my game experience, I have a dialogue system for players with scripted dialogue options using Inworld for my AI. I want to be able to trigger a goal with this scripted context. I believe that's possible, Drew. Nathan, do you want to maybe speak to this question?
Yeah, I'm just reading through that now. So so in general, you can definitely pass in like any scripted dialogue options. What I think would be more relevant is a combination of like a say verbatim feature. It seems like that's what you're going for. But yeah, feel free to elaborate on your question if that doesn't answer your question fully.
Steve, that's a great question. A lot of the features will start at enterprise and roll out to the pro and free tier. So if you have any specific feature you'd like to ask availability of, feel free to ask us.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, we're actually moving away from kind of differentiation as a part of like a big pricing update, kind of a sneak peek there. But yeah, all these features will definitely be included for all users.
I see another question about related to configurable safety for your question, David. Generally, for any of the topics that we disallow at a platform level, if it's something that is important to any specific experience, you can always reach out to us and we can whitelist certain topics depending on what the use case is. So for the use case that you just highlighted, we would have to have a custom conversation about it.
That's a great question, Daniel. So right now we have the support for MetaHuman because it has been a really robust solution. That being said, there are still other solutions out there, right? Like you can still have your, custom FBX models and have them rigged with, like, for example, Oculus OVR and things like that for the Vice memes. But, we suggest utilizing metahumans if possible, just because it seems that Unreal is putting a lot of resources and effort into maintaining that technology stack. You can still do it outside of MetaHuman. It's just that we saw the opportunity to participate in supporting a pretty widely used tech stack, right? We do have some Ready Player Me integration with Unreal, but even on that end, I think they haven't updated their support for 5.2 yet. So that could be a challenge if you're trying to keep up to date with 5.2. Thanks for highlighting that, Drewski. I will CC Nathan on that Discord forum post for him to get a better look at it. Alejandro is asking about a virtual tabletop. So very interesting use case here. Definitely, we even have a dungeon master character in Discord if you haven't had a chance to take a look yet. So I believe what you're asking for is the ability for, an external user to interact with your app on top of, Inworld. So that, is possible in the sense of, as long as you're utilizing one of our web SDKs, which I think would be the case here, you're able to handle the account creation on that end, and every process would essentially go through your workspace. We can have a chat following up on this, but that is something that is pretty interesting. Feel free to email us. Support at inworld.ai.
I was just going to add to Russell. I think for this example use case, it would be best to wait for design time API if you're intending to have a lot of different characters being created and for the setup to be very different. If it's the same character but just some changes, then there may be other techniques that we can use as well.
Sophia, do you want to talk about potentially multi-language support?
Yeah. Before I jump to that one, I think a message above was around a character remembering it's 1264. Yeah, that's absolutely what we're trying to achieve in the cognition control. So that use case we will be able to service very soon. Regarding internationalization language support, we are looking into how to better support different languages. We are also trying to prioritize which language we want to support. So if you have an experience where there are certain languages that you care a lot about, definitely reach out to us so we can better account for the relative interest between different languages. I see a question from Peter on safety settings. Safety settings impact two things. It impacts how the character speaks and reacts. It also impacts what checks we put in the core description motivations. Generally, we try to be a little more strict for the core description motivation checks just because language models work, such as if you put in a very a more unsafe prompt, then the output can be extremely unsafe, and we want to control for that.
Steve, so how would we describe an interaction? So it'd be very similar to what an API request would be, right? So sending a piece of information to our servers, for example, querying a character or sending conversational input. That would be an interaction. Let's see.
Also answering Sergey's question on multiplayer games. Yes, that's so our plan around multi-character multiplayer support is really to be able to have 2-to-1 or 1-to-2, right? 2 characters per 1 player, 2 players per 1 character, and then from there we scale up to be able to account for more players and more characters.
Dennis, that's an interesting question. I don't believe that we are, looking at this implementation of some sort of light model that is licensable. But, I've had developers ask about this. So maybe if Sophia or Nathan has an idea, they'd like to maybe answer this question, like a licensing of our models versus like a subscription-based model.
Yeah, right now our use cases are more subscription based, but for licensing we can discuss on case by case basis. So Dennis would encourage you to reach out to us and we can have one of our BD folks chat as well.
Anders is a great question. So he's, has discovered that you can actually still talk to our characters in different languages and ask them to answer in different languages. And so are we planning to support multilingual text-to-speech? Because I have seen some demos where via 11 Labs, actually, they were able to respond in Spanish. So that's interesting for us. But are we planning to support that natively?
So with multilingual, the distinction is, and for anyone who's more familiar with how the brain of the character works, for each one of these individual features that we have, whether it's intent detection within goals and action, whether it's knowledge retrieval within knowledge control, whether it's emotion engine, all of those are standalone sets of machine learning models that we use. And we also have a overall dialogue generation language model that we use. So generally, dialogue generation language models tend to have some basic multilingual support out of the box. But the reason we say we cannot support multilingual right now is because we have so many insular processes, individual engines that we also need to open up to multilingual. And TTS is one of them. We don't have any plans to enable TTS before we unlock multilingual for the entire stack yet. But once we unlock multilingual for the entire stack, then with partners like 11 Labs, multilingual TTS would be possible. And then multilingual speech to text would be something else that we would need to figure out who is the best partner to do that. Depending on certain languages, some of the more horizontal platform solutions would work, but other languages we may need more niche solution providers.
So Suns is a great question. He's working on, AI to AI conversations, and he's realized that he needs a director essentially to ensure, like what we were talking about, having the ability to control and understand contextually when each character should be speaking, order of conversations and things like that. So I think we've briefly answered this before, but it is definitely something that we are looking for in terms of supporting these multi-character interactions, right?
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely work in progress. So stay tuned. When we evolve for full group conversations, you'll see a lot more tools or narrative controls on how to script that out yourself.
Tito has a great question about why we're using Three.js. And I believe it is just one of the languages that we're more proficient in deploying this SDK, right? There's some 3D support for interfaces and stuff like that. I'm not 100% sure why we would be using Three.js over Baby Lawn.js, but if you would like to send me an email through our support channel, I can get our web SDK engineer to take a look. David is asking for subtitles. Yeah, so I believe when we send this out, we are able to either auto-generate subtitles through the meeting transcript or, at least get that translated. So thanks for letting us know. Accessibility is key, so thank you, David. Any plans for UE-FN integration? Great question, Daniel. So, we are an Epic Mega Grants recipient, and I'm sure we're in conversations with Unreal to ensure that we can support developers where they are. Ideally, I get a chance to talk to some of the UE-FN people at Unrealfest this year, but maybe Nathan has some more information.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely on our radar. Like the native integration is something that we don't see like a direct path towards, but down the line, you could definitely look for that. Short term, if any of the developers here are actually interested in modding that, let us know, and we're happy to work together on that.
Well, great. Thank you so much for your time today, everybody. I just wanted to highlight that we have our Origins, demo fully released on Steam. It's free. So if you're looking at, trying to understand how to better integrate or see some of these goals and actions V2 in progress live from a narrative perspective that we've designed, I highly suggest you check out Origins. It's pretty fun. You get a chance to interact with a wide variety of characters. And it's a good way to kind of get a taste and understand what our aspirational view of how to integrate Inworld would be. And feel free to reach out. That's our Twitter QR code. Our Discord is there. You'll see me in there a lot. And I also wanted to highlight and shout out thank you to Nathan and Sophia and Julia behind the scenes for all the help putting together this webinar and being here today.